Hello, welcome to In the Room, where we are recording an emergency pod, as you can see from our slightly situation room style meeting room here. We're not on our usual location. We are at Independent Towers, where we've just watched Nigel Farage's press statement.
Today, I will resign as a Member of Parliament for Clacton-on-Sea, thereby forcing a by-election, which should happen, I hope, in short order. No, I've decided that the people of Clacton should be the judges of my actions. This will be a people versus the establishment by-election.
On Friday, we did an episode asking whether Reform were in trouble. I don't know whether they listened to us themselves, but it seems that they've decided to respond to the media establishment, i.e. Helen and I, with a scathing but arguably very well executed speech this afternoon.
Am I angry? Well, I've never been angrier in my life.
So what did he say? 2 p.m, he went to the top of Millbank Tower, which is very near the Palace of Westminster. And really he was responding to some very, very tense scrutiny of his finances recently. So on Friday, we talked about the £5 million he's been given by the Thailand-based crypto billionaire Christopher Harben, and some of the properties that he owns. And over the weekend, the Sunday Times had a scoop about his links to George Cottrell and the payments in kind that he was receiving from his friend, who's been with him since his UKIP days, but has also spent time in an American prison for fraud.
Wire fraud.
Wire fraud, sorry. Quite a different
One of my favourite
of
crimes.
A different fraud altogether. So anyway, Reform put out a statement this afternoon saying Nigel Farage is going to make a public speech on his future in public life, and everyone got very overexcited. Was he throwing in the towel again? Because he has a habit of doing this. I said on Friday that he's like a snake and he sort of sheds his various skins. And so we were wondering whether we'd be putting out a podcast episode saying that Nigel Farage has stepped down from Reform, but that means we're only a year away from his announcement of a new party. But he didn't do that. He has stepped down as the MP for Clacton-on-Sea and is calling a by-election so that he can fight what he's describing as a people versus the establishment campaign.
It's a chance to stick two fingers up to the entire establishment, to frankly tell them where to go. And that is why I will be putting my name forward to stand in this by-election. I will fight to win. I will fight to continue the political revolution that Reform has started.
We should say his line was very clear. So it was an extraordinary speech that we'll dissect in a bit, because there was all sorts of interesting things within it that are kind of wider notes for what is going on in our politics, and some extremely bad news for Andy Burnham, because Nigel Farage has effectively taken his lunch. So instead of the next 100 days, when Andy Burnham becomes Prime Minister, being a narrative that's controlled by Andy Burnham, it will instead be something that is owned by Nigel Farage, which is not what they were planning for, obviously. What Nigel Farage said in that speech today, his line was very clear. He denied any wrongdoing at all. He said he'd broken no law. He said as far as he was concerned, he'd broken no parliamentary rules, and that he'd had advice about the difference between public life and private life, and that this was just basically a massive establishment stitch-up. So he was going to take the fight to the establishment in this by-election, and he was very clear it was a kind of klaxon call for the people to vote with him, stick two fingers up, and almost double down on his being an MP. He's not going to be elected just once, but he's going to be elected twice. It follows days, as you were saying, Cleo, of scrutiny about his personal finances. There are these conduct investigations going on already in Parliament that he's subject to. Nigel Farage is managing to thread together all of these things to make a very credible and believable sounding thing that there is an establishment stitch-up. He's added this up, and that's what it sounds like. I think when you get under the skin, there's actually rather a lot more going on there. The Parliamentary Standards investigation will carry on regardless. It's an investigation into what he has done while he is an MP. So we're going to have that going on in the background at the same time as potentially a by-election campaign, at the same time as potentially a new Parliamentary Standards inquiry. So the previous one is about this £5 million, which was given to Nigel Farage by Christopher Harben, that in the press conference he described as a lottery win. But there is probably now another standards investigation about to commence into these payments in kind from George Cottrell. So Cleo, we sat there together at one of our lovely watch parties and watched something live as it was unfolding. What did you make of his speech?
It was a bit awkward actually because we watched it on Sky News and he had a pretty good go at Sky News, but they nearly dropped out, but they stuck with him. It was well done. So it was a well put together 15-minute statement. There were no questions at the end, just like Andy Burnham's had recently. He was able, in a slightly Trumpian way, I suppose, to pull together little factoids that kind of built his case, built a narrative. He was angry. I mean, he was really kind of furiously angry, and he used all the speculation of the last few days to put together what felt quite a compelling argument, actually. And you can bet your bottom dollar that Reform will be cutting bits of that speech together and putting them out over the airwaves for the foreseeable weeks. It's a really interesting phenomenon now in politics to have such a controlled setting for these kinds of public statements. And, previously that's always been in the government's gift, that you could put a lectern up in number 10 with a couple of flags behind you, or you go out into the street and you can summon all the nation's journalists there. But Reform were able to do that just by saying, look at our YouTube channel at 2 p.m. We won't be taking any questions, thanks. We're not going to invite you into the room, but we're going to tantalise you with the idea that he might be stepping down as an MP altogether. All Labour's problems are solved. And then actually, I'm going to use you to pump out the exact version of events that I want, ending with a kind of mic drop, and there's going to be a by-election, and it's going to be fought on the terms I want. I'm framing this exactly the way I want to, which is forget Makerfield, forget Aberdeen South, come to Clacton, fight me man to man. Mwah, mwah.
Isn't it extraordinary though? Because effectively that's what we're going to end up with, is these two people in Andy Burnham and Nigel Farage who have taken the fight to these particular constituencies and then are extrapolating out of the victory in one constituency into therefore equals I carry the will of the people with me. And it's an extraordinary thing to have pulled off, to both be kind of standing down but back for the fight and fighting on to win. If you were Nigel Farage's political opponents, that speech would not have been comfortable watching because it was really good, actually.
Well, not only that, but we talked on Friday about being very careful about being drawn onto battleground you don't want to fight on. And what has happened here is Labour and the Conservatives, and in fact, basically the rest of the political class, have got very excited about this ethics and standards inquiries. And it is right to scrutinise him, and we'll get into some of the bits we think he's on slightly shakier ground on in his arguments, in his statement. But essentially, by trying to play the man and not the ball, they have stumbled into a by-election. Actually, none of them want to fight. None of them want to fight him in a by-election. But by sort of forcing this pressure on him and thinking, yes, we're going to go after him. We're going to write to the Standards Commissioner and insist that they open more investigations. And, he should be scrutinised. That's absolutely true. He's managed to dodge a by-election being forced on him by just announcing one and saying, and this is how I want to frame it, it's the people versus the establishment. Where do you stand? It's really well done. And it's so frustrating from a kind of campaigning point of view to watch the establishment stumble straight into this trap, because that's what it is. And you're exactly right. He's managed now to suck all the oxygen out of Andy Burnham's first 100 days in office, because not only do they have this Manchester mayoral election, they are going to have to go and fight Nigel Farage on his home ground in Clacton. Incidentally, the Reform grid for the summer, we talked on Friday about what might they do this summer. The last 2 summers, they've capitalised on what's going on in the public mood and where there have been any kind of tensions over specific incidents, where they've made hay, and where they used particularly August to do their own press conferences, and they led the agenda and they made sure the news was theirs. Well, they've done it again because they've just guaranteed another summer of Reform.
Is there any chance of anybody other than Reform winning in this constituency? She's asking for a friend.
Well, I don't know. I mean, just to give you a couple of stats on this, Farage won 46% of the vote in 2024. The Conservatives came second on nearly 28%. We still didn't have a candidate, obviously. and Labour didn't do particularly well there. I mean, it's there's kind of an argument that why wouldn't you field some candidates? But at the moment, Reform are on track to hold 60% of the vote in Clacton. So he's due to do pretty well. It is his to lose, which is also, there are risks and rewards with this kind of thing. The only thing I would say in a kind of risk register for Farage is that you have to be quite careful about calling elections that you don't really need. And a by-election on average costs about £250,000. He had a bit of a go at Andy Burnham for taking part in the Makerfield by-election because this has triggered a very expensive Manchester mayoral election. And Labour itself was quite cross about that. You saw various briefings about it against Andy Burnham at the time. And I guess my note of caution for Farage is Theresa May was on track to do very well in the 2017 general election until she actually called it. So she needed a bigger majority to get her Brexit deal through. And she called the election and, taking aside the campaigning tactics of Jeremy Corbyn and momentum and what was a pretty impressive campaign, there was a sense when you drilled down into particularly focus groups, people would say, this just feels a bit self-indulgent. We don't need this election. I don't feel like you've made the case to have one properly. In 2019, we also called an early election because we weren't doing one for another 3 or 4 years, but we tried to frame it in the public mind that it was quite people versus establishment then. Parliament is not delivering Brexit. We've got to get Brexit done. The only way to do that, to break the deadlock, is to have a general election. And perhaps Farage can do that with his people.
Well, it's a very popular battle cry, the people versus the establishment, isn't it? And I think the other thing that's interesting about this, of the many things that are interesting, is that the worst thing that could happen as the outcome of the Parliamentary Standards Commissioner's inquiry is Nigel Farage having to resign or being resigned and losing his seat and there having to be a by-election.
Yeah.
So it's basically just cut straight to the end of there's no harm that this process can do it. Firstly, he's totally changed the framing in the kind of normal rules of politics and laws of gravity don't apply to me. But I have brought forward the worst punishment they can give me and I'm just going to take that on the chin and then go forward anyway. So he's totally neutralised any of these questions and this scrutiny because he's already taking the punishment and, to all intents and purposes, is going to win.
Could he have it again? Could he do this by-election and then there could be like another one in the autumn?
I think it would look really bad in terms of playing into the narrative that, Westminster systems and elite and everything are out of touch. If actually Nigel Farage stands down, basically says to the electorate of Clacton, elect me knowing all the facts which is all of this kind of murkiness around the money, and they bring him back regardless. And then the Parliamentary Standards Commissioner says, well, technically you did break some rules and we're suspending you and we're going to be another by-election. That will just look absolutely crazy.
This is one of my brow wrinkles at one of the things that Farage said, actually, and I'm really interested to get your take on this, which is the idea that the Standards Commissioner is being kind of weaponised against him. He made the point that this does not involve a misuse of public money. This is money that he's been given privately. But I found it slightly mysterious that he was going after the Parliamentary Standards Commissioner because, in my experience, it's quite a toothless office in some ways.
Well, I mean, I know the guy who is now Daniel Greenberg, who is the Parliamentary Standards Commissioner. He used to be Parliamentary Counsel, so the person who wrote the laws inside government. He is a fiercely independent man, as anybody who worked in government and tried to persuade him to do something that he didn't want to do, even when it was his job.
Yeah.
I mean, the notion this guy is being at all influenced by any of this stuff that's for the birds. That's not the case.
Not least because he was perfectly happy going after Keir Starmer for his suits and glasses.
I mean, he's a proper guy, is Daniel, and he'll dance to the beat of his own drum or whatever. I think that the harder thing is Nigel Farage was so robust on I haven't done anything wrong. He said he'd taken legal advice. He's got this very strong divide in his head between public and private. So one of the things that he's been arguing is that it's nothing to do with the public, that I've got this money privately. It's about my private life. How dare you ask any questions? So again, with a slightly sinking feeling about, this is some of the advice that we had been given, that it was really odd that Nigel Farage, who has spent his life kind of operating outside the system, seemed to be being beaten by the system. And here he is, he's leapt out of it, and he's completely owning the fact that he personally has been given these really significant sums of money and has basically gone, firstly, what of it? And then secondly, made some very punchy and powerful arguments about why he needs it for his personal security, which he did very effectively today.
Yeah, I wanted to know what you thought of that, actually. He talked about his daughter. He used a line which was, I'm the most physically assaulted MP, which for me touched a nerve.
Yeah, I mean, we've had, unfortunately, 2 MPs in our parliament in the last 10 years who've been murdered. So, I mean, that was a really bad thing, very crass thing to say. I'm not trying to underestimate how much threat he feels, but to say that you're the person that's had the most physical assaults when we've had 2 MPs murdered is not acceptable. I also think that I would be massively surprised if it turns out that Nigel Farage has had more abuse than, for example, Diane Abbott has had. There is an element in what he's talking about today, which is a really important conversation we ought to be having. The way that our elected officials are treated by everybody, they're like common sort of fair game in a way, and they are put under physical threat. Their families are bullied. There's some really serious problems here, and they're insufficiently protected. And I hope in and amongst all of this, there's an opportunity to have serious questions and serious conversations about it. When you and I worked together, I used to be repeatedly just totally shocked by what MPs would put up with.
Totally.
Because they do so out of a sense of not wanting to look like they're exploiting the state or asking for special favours, and they just put up with this extraordinary kind of abuse in their own constituents, like it's fair game. And I do think we have done something really bad where we've corroded the nature of public debate to such a degree that these things are normal. So Nigel Farage was talking about some quite serious stuff about feeling threatened. I mean, some of it, to taste whether he would have said the things that he'd said, but he has got, again, unfortunately for his opponents, a legitimate point to make. He also did what, all of us daughters who have dads will recognise as something which I think will, again, go down very well for anybody watching, is he absolutely owned how angry he was last week, and he named the newspapers he was angry about because they said they'd published a photograph of his daughter, where his daughter lived, and brought his daughter into it. And he was genuinely raging, and he was using that kind of righteous anger about protecting his daughter in a way that was very politically useful for him. The reason people were taking pictures of his daughter's house is because that was one of the houses that has been called into question about where does the money come from in this big property empire. So it wasn't kind of totally randomly that someone was trying to go after his daughter. It was that it was part of this whole story. That doesn't, however, undermine the legitimacy of him being righteously and hoppingly mad. Yeah. That somebody who's nothing to do with his life has been brought into kind of this debate. Yes,
and actually he never has used his family for sort of political gain. You don't get the sort of photo shoots of him cosily at home, or you use them as kind of shining lights. Here I am, I'm a family man, or anything. Maybe that just doesn't work for him. There was something else he said that I wondered whether you also might have agreed with, which was him talking about the Labour government cancelling elections in the last couple of years.
I thought that was very clever. I thought, again, if you want to study the kind of beats that he hit in his speech to create this case that the establishment, I mean, if only we did have a coordinated establishment, imagine.
You'd know Black Eyes.
It's
at the centre of the web lies Helen McNamara.
Definitely more cock-up than conspiracy, I would say. Least organised conspiracy ever. But the establishment he threaded this set of things together to basically demonstrate that the world was against poor reform, riding high in 350 opinion polls, the largest political party in our country. He's still trying to very hard present reform as these underdogs that just need help because they're these poor victims of circumstance. When, I mean, they are riding high, they're richer, probably they've got more donors than any other political party. They are not kind of anywhere near their last legs, but he's managed to present quite a convincing argument about that. Mm-hmm. And the point he was making about the fact that the Labour government wanted to cancel elections in May, unfortunately true, that they only happened because of the Reform Court case, also true. So he has these really rock-solid big truths that he's able to lace together and then make 2 and 2 equal a table.
Yeah, it's a very effective narrative. It's the people versus establishment necklace. I think there's something very Trumpian about it, actually. This feels straight out of the Trump playbook.
Agree.
So there's the idea of the mainstream media being against him, although he does have a show on GB News.
He is literally the mainstream media.
Yeah. And even using his own sort of platform, his own YouTube channel to present this. It's a bit like Trump having True Social. It's stuff like the gold and the crypto, that all feels kind of nebulous and weird, and who's got money where sloshing around. The idea that he made lots of money, but then that seems to have disappeared. Interestingly, as an MEP, which is when you a member of the European Parliament, I mean, that is a famous gravy train. So I don't quite understand why his money went there, but it's a bit Trumpian, that, which is, I have this amazing business experience, I made loads of money, and yet on paper, he seems to be in a bit of trouble.
I thought it was fascinating that he was doing a kind of quite, unpleasant, nobody else understands how the world works, and this is just business, and then telling the story about being a commodities trader and how he made loads of money in the city, and then a great personal sacrifice. He jumped on the gravy train to become an MEP, which, as you say, extremely well paid. And then he talked about very proudly about how he's made loads of money from being an influencer. He ticked a lot of kind of boxes of what he's been
7
doing.
7 million followers on social media.
A
bit more than us, I'll be honest.
Just a couple more. And he's done all of these things. And then he said, and then he got this lottery win, and basically then tried to present this as, and that's just how the world works. It's like the world doesn't work like that for any other human. None of the rest of us are trolling around getting lottery wins.
I thought that was interesting, framing it as a lottery win, like it could happen to anybody.
It could be you.
And this crypto billionaire happened to drop 5 million quid into my lap. I mean, that's incidentally my pension plan, is to win an Omaze house. But I think the specific Trumpian bit also is, we've done so well. We have we've come top in the last 350 polls. We have more members than any other party. We're winning so hard. And yet, because the establishment is working against us and not playing by the rules and trying to take me down, we're not winning enough.
Yeah, it's both, I'm a massive loser and a victim, and a massive winner. He manages to dance between those two things in a really interesting way.
Mm. On Friday, I said, without realising I had this amazing predictive power, that all the political parties were going to have a sort of revival this summer. And I think it's fair to say that Labour will have theirs because they have a new Prime Minister coming in. And this could very much rejuvenate reform one way or another. And I don't think it should be forgotten that reform do need this. They have not won the last 5 by-elections. Obviously, they're now bringing this onto Farage's home turf, and they ought to win this. But it is a big test for him. They are slipping in the polls. Restore UK are making some gains of their own. The Conservatives are making some gains. I mean, this is in some ways, it's a clever tactic, and it's a way to suck everybody into the game that you want to play. But it is also the kind of a gamble of someone who's slipping away.
And it's also a massive illusion. So we've talked about kind of all of the elements of this confidence trick, if you like, all of the things that have been brought together to make a certain presentation. But this is not an underdog. This is a man entirely of the establishment. This is a privately educated guy who worked as a banker or in the city and then went into politics. It's like, gosh, what a maverick. And that has so much of the trappings of being somebody of the establishment. And although he has these kind of weave together these truths, there's a lot of gaps in the middle where there isn't a truth.
Correct.
And there's a lot of spaces where you think, well, actually, is it really that credible that it's okay to claim it doesn't matter who gives you money, they can just give you money, and you somehow uniquely are going to be the only politician who's therefore not influenced by that? That's why this stuff matters. It's not because people are super against politicians having money. I don't think so very much.
Yeah.
But they're really against people's influence being bought. And there's no attempt at all in any of this to deny that there might be some influence or some sense of obligation, or, if I gave you £5 million, you probably would be grateful, I guess.
I'd be
extremely
grateful.
I don't have £5 million to give you. I'm really sorry.
But it is true. He has said previously, nobody owns me. But he is for sale. I mean,
literally on Cameo.
Yes, exactly. And even in this statement, he couldn't resist slipping in that, he has marketed a couple of financial products and everyone's done extremely well from them.
He actually used, I loved that. He
cheeky.
Part of this was an advert for his own advert, which I think that is really meta.
Yeah. But also, if these products are doing so well, why do you need to borrow money from anybody else?
Some of this was puzzling. It's like, I've made so much money that I need more money, but I don't need any money. And if I did take money, it's none of your business.
Yeah. Well, one of the slight inside baseball things that I did pick up on, and it's only because we've talked about this on previous episodes, is the idea of the Sunday Times as a Labour paper. Specifically, Gabriel Pogland as a journalist who in some way has been going after Nigel Farage.
Can I say, I absolutely hate this singling out of journalists. I think of all of the kind of playbook of proper wrong-uns, like basically saying, my supporters this way, have a go at this person who is only doing their job. They are doing their job.
And he's doing his job bloody well. I mean, the reason we've talked about Gabriel before is because there was this essentially sting operation against him by a Labour think tank, Labour Together.
I think you've all forgotten about that now, Claire.
I haven't forgotten because, I mean, God, the web goes so deep. But Josh Simons, who gave up his seat for Andy Burnham in Makerfield, used to be head of this organisation. And he essentially signed off, very naively, he says, on a report into journalists like Gabriel Pogland. Like, the idea that he is some kind of Labour stooge is for the birds. One of my favourite expressions.
I just think this is a really damaging road to have gone down, and it's not just started recently, but you have a lot of politicians sort of naming and shaming journalists, refusing to answer questions from a particular newspaper. Like, our democracy is held together by journalistic accountability. You and I have personally been on the thick end of the unpleasant side of this, where you do, unfortunately, sometimes it does not work out well for you, our tremendous free press. However, I'd like to defend it to dying death. It's really important. And the more that you can try and close space for journalistic scrutiny, the more we have really serious problems, because it's totally legitimate to ask politicians questions. And it's totally just legitimate to ask them questions about where their money comes from. I found the other thing troubling in when he was talking about money, he said that he hadn't misspent any public money and he'd not claimed a single pound of expenses while he was an MP.
Yes, this is one of your favourite subjects, because we've talked about MP salaries before, and I said they're already paid a lot. And you made a very valid point.
Oh, thanks.
I'm
just that one.
God, my God, I'm coming around to your way of thinking. It's very worrying. I am the establishment now. But you said by MP salaries not being high enough, they claim expenses or take money from others, and it's therefore corruption by the back door. And this is it in action.
Yes, I'm sure it's true. He said that he hasn't claimed a single parliamentary expense. And that's because presumably he's been funding his political activity via these donations, as we can see, or via the party. So standing up and saying, I've not taken any money from anyone, well, actually, if you're an MP, it's legitimate to claim expenses. It's quite important that you do, because then it's transparent where the money is coming and going from. And this kind of sanctimony about MPs who can stand there with vast sums of money behind them, saying, well, I haven't taken a penny of public money. It's like, well, you might not have done, but that money that's supporting you has come from somewhere. And it creates real inequality problems, because if you don't have a kind friend who would like you to win the lottery, what are you supposed to do?
Yes, and I think this is an interesting sort of campaigning challenge for the parties going up against reform in Clacton, which is, that is a great strapline, people versus the establishment. And what can you do? Like, who owns Farage? Trying to make...
That's quite good, actually.
So I love a 3-word slogan.
We know.
Trying to put together an argument for people, which is, he's not taking any public money, but he is accepting money from crypto billionaires and gold traders and this kind of thing, and a convicted fraudster. It just requires a little bit of explanation, whereas he is able to make quite an easy, in quotations, easy argument, which is, the establishment are trying to take me down, stick with me, stick a finger up to them. And the impression I get from current reform voters is that is already how people feel. They already feel like the establishment doesn't work for them, that they already have a distrust of the mainstream media. They already feel that it would absolutely be typical to try and take Nigel Farage down. I'm going to stick with him.
Our Nigel. We're going to look after our Nigel.
Our Nigel versus our kid.
Oh, cripes. Cleo, we also noticed that your old friend Dominic Cummings got a shout out in that speech.
Yeah.
So Mr Farage said that Dom Cummings was right.
I know, I sent Dom a message saying, do you know that you've been name-checked in this speech? And he went, oh, God, now what have I done? And I was like, no, it's worse than that. You've been mentioned in glowing terms.
So this was what Nigel Farage said, was that Dom had said at some point previously that Whitehall would break the law to bring down reform. And that's effectively, again, the allegation that Nigel Farage was making about this establishment stitch-up or cover-up or attempt to bring him down. The thing I want to come back to on the party donors bit is the other very, smart thing that Nigel Farage talked about in the kind of, well, I might have taken money from these people, but party donors have being made peers for the other two main parties. Look at the expenses that were given to Keir. There's a whole load of actually, they're all at it.
Yeah.
It's a very unusual thing for a politician to stand up and say, we're all at it, so therefore what I'm doing is fine. But effectively, that's what he did.
Yes. I mean, first off, I don't know what law Whitehall, in quotations, Whitehall has broken to take down reform. But this is exactly the point I was making on Friday, playing the man, not the ball. There is already this idea that everyone's at it. So when we talked about these massive figures, £5 million, £270,000, £80,000 from Cameo, these are massive amounts. They're lottery win amounts, as he would concede. But there is this perception that everyone's at it. So he doesn't necessarily stand out. And I just think that whilst our actual problems persist around immigration and cost of living and a stagnant economy and everything else that we've talked about so many times, trying to delegitimise him based purely off this standards and ethics stuff. It's important, scrutiny is important, can't say that enough times, but you fall right into the battleground that works for him. He's essentially we don't know that the last few days when people have said, oh, he looks very rattled, he looks very ratty, he's kind of been luring everyone into his trap and then snap, it's shut on them, and now they're in a bloody by-election against Nigel Farage on his home ground. I mean, guys, you've got to think about your actual problems here. And if Andy Burnham's team have got a brain cell amongst them, which I'm sure they do,
I think they do.
They need to be thinking, how do we get this onto what we want to talk about now? We've got 100 days, not even, because it's halfway through a parliament already, to make a big impact. And they need to outfox Farage. And he's a sneaky old bastard. Thank you so much for listening to this emergency episode. It's very exciting. This week, our executive producer was Rod Adahali and our producer was Sam Durham.
This podcast is part of the Independent Podcast Network and produced in association with Next Chapter Studios. We'd like to thank our content editor, Maya Anushka, and our video editor and videographer, Vali Raza. See you next week.